The Praetorian Guard, Chapter 15, Shadows in the Capital. John and Kara stood at the edge of the quiet town, the house behind them still aglow with the warm memories of the past few days. John's mother had stood in the doorway, waving them off with a smile and reminding John to come home more often. After bidding farewell, John and Kara boarded the shuttle that would take them back to the capital. As the small craft hummed to life and lifted off the ground, John couldn't help but glance back one last time, feeling a pang of something he couldn't quite name. Kara sat beside him in the shuttle's passenger seat, her fingers resting lightly on her lap, eyes looking forward, but clearly lost in thought. John wasn't sure if she was reflecting on the recent emotional rollercoaster or preparing for the return to duty, but he felt a strange sense of calm knowing she was by his side. As the shuttle raced toward the capital, its sleek form cutting through the sky, John tried to clear his mind. The brief respite with his family had been a needed break from the chaos of his life in the shadows. But the peace couldn't last. Duty awaited. It always did. In the heart of the capital, two figures stood in the shadows of a dimly lit room, the cold air thick with the scent of conspiracy. The first figure, tall and cloaked, leaned against the wall, his voice low and sharp as he spoke. "Did you hear what happened 2 weeks ago?" The second man, seated in the gloom, turned slightly, the flicker of light from a nearby screen barely illuminating his hooded face. "Yes, I've read all the reports. The shadows interfered." The first man's voice was filled with frustration. "It wasn't just the shadows. There was someone else, someone unexpected." The seated man shifted, his eyes narrowing beneath the hood. "Unexpected? What do you mean?" "The reports are unclear, but there was a single operative who turned the tide," the first man replied. "Whoever he was, he disrupted everything. The assassination was flawless in design, but this man ruined it all." The second figure, though calm, let out a quiet breath of frustration. "Plans don't account for the unexpected, it seems. We lost valuable men." The first man continued, anger creeping into his tone. "They had one job: eliminate the minister. Instead, the minister lives, the emperor's hold strengthens, and our brothers are dead." The second figure leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping against the armrest. "The shadows, we underestimated them. And their people, we should have expected interference." The first man spat. "The shadows have always been in the emperor's pocket, but this operative, whoever he is, set back our revolution." A moment of silence hung between them, the tension thick as they both weighed the gravity of their failure. "The empire is still ripe for revolution," the first man said, breaking the silence. "But next time, we will be smarter. We will strike when they least expect it. And when we do, we'll be ready for their secret weapons, these operatives." The second man's voice was cold, calculating. "We have to ensure our preparations are flawless. The next strike must be coordinated, and we will be ready to face the shadows. Their mystery man, whoever he is, won't stop us next time." The first man nodded. "For now, we wait. But when the time comes, we will avenge our fallen brothers. The emperor will fall." A soft beep echoed through the room, signaling the end of their meeting. Without another word, the two figures parted ways, disappearing into the shadows like phantoms. Meanwhile, in the grand palace at the heart of the capital, Emperor Corvinus Aurelius sat in his vast, opulent office, his dark eyes scanning a report with a slight, amused smile playing at his lips. The large windows behind him framed the sprawling city of Nova Lux, the capital of the Terran Dominion, glimmering like a sea of stars in the evening light. The report he was reading was the complete investigation into the recent assassination attempt on the Minister of Defense. An incident that had shaken the political elite. The names and events laid out in the document were familiar, but one name stood out. John Steele. Corvinus leaned back in his grand chair, tapping his fingers lightly on the armrest. "John Steele," he murmured to himself. The name was familiar, of course. He had followed the career of the young man ever since he'd been top of his class at the academy. Now, Steele was a key player in the Shadows of the Night, an organization Corvinus had always kept a close eye on. And once again, Steele had proven his loyalty and skill, by protecting one of the Dominion's most valuable ministers. The Emperor's smile widened. He admired men like Steele, loyal, effective, and willing to do whatever was necessary for the survival of the Empire. Men like that were rare in the ranks of the military. "I hope you will grow faster, John," says the Emperor in a low voice. Setting down the report, Corvinus reached for another document on his desk, this one already filled out, but waiting for his signature. He read through it once more, his smile growing even more satisfied as he wrote his name at the bottom of the page. John Steele had earned his reward. Pressing a small button on the side of his desk, Corvinus called for his secretary. The massive doors to his office swung open, and a woman in her early 30s, dressed in a sharp, formal uniform, entered the room. She moved with quiet grace, her posture precise, her eyes sharp and focused as she approached the Emperor's desk. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice calm and steady. Corvinus looked up from the document, his smile still present. He handed her a sleek tablet, the glowing screen displaying the document he had just signed. "See to it that this reaches the High Command," he said, his voice smooth with authority. "John Steele is to receive a commendation for his actions during the minister's incident, and—" he paused, his eyes glinting with approval. "Make him eligible for promotion." The secretary nodded, taking the tablet from him without question. "It will be done, Your Majesty." As she turned to leave, Corvinus glanced back at the view outside his office window, his fingers steepled in front of him. The capital gleamed under the setting sun, the Empire's seat of power unshaken by the chaos that had nearly unfolded. The rebellion brewing in the shadows was concerning, but the Empire had weathered worse. And with men like John Steele in service to the crown, the Emperor's confidence remained unshaken. Back on the shuttle, the capital city of Nova Lux came into view, a glittering metropolis sprawled beneath them. The closer they got, the more John could feel the weight of responsibility settling back onto his shoulders. The quiet peace of his time at home with Kara was already slipping away, replaced by the ever-present demands of duty. Kara, sitting beside him, turned to him with a soft smile. "Back to the grind," she said, her voice light, but with a trace of humor. "Think we'll get 5 minutes to breathe before something else goes wrong?" John chuckled. "Doubtful, but we'll handle it." As the shuttle descended toward the landing strip, John felt a renewed sense of purpose. The shuttle hummed softly as it descended through the cloudless sky, the sprawling city of Nova Lux coming into view beneath them. The capital glittered like a sea of lights, a stark contrast to the quiet, peaceful town John and Kara had just left behind. John watched through the window, his thoughts heavy, yet calm. The days spent at home, far from the chaos of duty, had been a balm for his soul. But now, the real world was calling him back, the weight of responsibility settling once again on his shoulders. Kara sat beside him, a quiet smile on her lips, as she stared out of her own window. Though they hadn't spoken much since they left his mother's house, there was an undeniable closeness between them now. They didn't need words to fill the silence. Their understanding had deepened in a way that went beyond mere conversation. As the shuttle touched down on one of the capital's many landing pads, Kara turned to John, her eyes soft but full of determination. "Back to reality," she said with a small laugh, unbuckling her seatbelt. "Back to reality." John echoed, his voice quiet, but his lips curved into a soft smile as he turned toward her. They both stood, gathering their things as the shuttle's door hissed open. The cool evening air of Nova Lux swept into the cabin as they stepped out onto the landing pad. The noise of the bustling capital surrounded them once again, but for a brief moment they stood still. Just the two of them. Kara took a step toward him, her hand brushing his arm. "I guess this is where we part ways for now," she said, her voice light, but there was a note of reluctance in it. John nodded, his gaze meeting hers. "For now." Without another word, Kara leaned in, her lips meeting Joan's in a soft, lingering kiss. It was a promise, one that they didn't need to voice. When they pulled away, there was no awkwardness, no hesitation. Just understanding.
Take care of yourself, John,
Kara whispered, her fingers lightly squeezing his hand.
You too,
John replied, his voice low and steady.
We'll see each other soon.
With a final smile, Kara turned and headed toward her transport, disappearing into the flow of people. John stood for a moment, watching her go, his heart a mix of calm and uncertainty. Then, with a deep breath, he turned and made his way home. The next morning, the sun was just beginning to rise over the towering spires of Nova Lux, as John made his way toward the hidden headquarters of the Shadows of the Night. The streets were already bustling with activity. Vendors setting up their stalls, people hurrying to work, soldiers marching in formation, but Joan's mind was elsewhere. His brief escape into normal life was over, and now it was time to return to the Shadows. When he arrived at the nondescript building that housed the entrance to the Shadows' headquarters, he entered without hesitation. The heavily fortified doors slid open, revealing the familiar corridors that led deeper underground, to the place where secrets lived and the Dominion's most dangerous operatives worked. The cool, sterile air of the underground facility greeted him as he stepped inside, the quiet hum of security systems barely audible. John navigated the halls with ease, passing by familiar faces who nodded at him in recognition, though none dared to ask questions. The Shadows weren't known for small talk. As he approached the briefing room where Sarah's team gathered, John felt a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. He hadn't been back long, and already there was a new mission on the horizon. But this time, something else loomed even larger, an order from the Emperor himself. The door slid open with a soft whoosh, and John stepped into the room to find Sarah and her team already gathered around the circular table, discussing their latest intel. Mark, the team's weapons specialist, was in the middle of a rather animated explanation about a new piece of gear when he noticed John enter.
Look who decided to show up.
Mark grinned, his blue eyes sparkling with mischief.
Back from your vacation already, Johnny?
The others turned to look at him, each wearing expressions of mild amusement. Sun, their quiet explosives expert, simply nodded in greeting, while Salah, the counterintelligence officer, leaned back in his chair, his stoic expression hiding whatever thoughts he might have had. Marta, the cybernetics specialist, smiled brightly, her usual enthusiasm evident. Sarah, standing at the head of the table, gave John a knowing look, her arms crossed.
You look refreshed,
she said, her tone teasing.
Did the countryside treat you well?
John smirked, shaking his head as he moved toward them.
It was quiet, but I've got news.
The playful atmosphere in the room shifted slightly as everyone leaned in, sensing the seriousness in John's voice.
I received an order from the Emperor,
John began, watching as the surprise flickered across their faces.
He's issued me a commendation for what happened during the minister's incident, and...
He paused for a moment, still wrapping his mind around the gravity of it.
There's word I'll be promoted soon.
For a split second there was stunned silence. Then, Mark let out a low whistle.
Well, I'll be damned,
he said, leaning back in his chair with a grin.
Our Johnny boy's moving up in the world. What's the new rank? First grade, Lieutenant.
John replied, the weight of the words sinking in as he said them. Sarah's expression shifted from surprise to approval. She stepped forward, extending her hand.
Congratulations, Lieutenant Steele. You've earned it.
John shook her hand firmly, feeling the genuine respect behind her words. Sarah had been a mentor to him in many ways, guiding him through the trials of the Shadows, and her approval meant more to him than he would admit. One by one, the rest of the team joined in, offering their congratulations. Mark clapped John on the back with a mischievous grin.
First grade lieutenant, huh? Just don't go getting all high and mighty on us.
Sun nodded in his quiet, unassuming way.
Well deserved.
Salah, even the stoic one, simply said,
You've proven yourself.
Marta, bouncing with her usual energy, added,
And now, you're officially a big deal. I'll have to update all our records.
John chuckled, appreciating the lightness of the moment. For a team that operated in the darkest corners of the Dominion, they knew how to celebrate when it mattered. But despite the congratulations, John couldn't help but feel the weight of his new rank. Promotions in the shadows weren't just a matter of ceremony, they came with more responsibility, more secrets, and higher stakes. As the team settled back into their discussion, Sarah motioned for John to follow her into a smaller side room. Once the door slid shut behind them, she turned to him, her eyes sharp but warm.
"You know what this means, don't you?"
she asked, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. John nodded.
"More missions, more responsibility, and more attention,"
Sarah added, her voice serious.
"The Emperor has his eye on you now, John. That's both a blessing and a curse. You've earned his favor, but it also means you're moving into deeper waters. You're ready for it. I wouldn't have pushed for your promotion otherwise, but be careful."
John met her gaze, understanding the gravity of her words.
"I will."
Sarah smiled then, a rare, genuine smile.
"Good. Now let's get back to work."
As they left the room, John couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and apprehension. The weight of his new role settled on his shoulders, but he knew he wasn't alone. He had Sarah, his team, and now Kara. The future was uncertain, but he was ready to face it. For better or worse, John Steele was no longer just a soldier in the shadows. He was becoming something more.